Alrighty. Whoa, microphone. There we go. Oh my goodness. Do audio. All right, there we go. Okay, here we go. Okay, so today we're almost at the end of the course. I realize how close we are, right? We basically got a week left in the term, which means really just 3 lectures in this class. Okay, so and I will send an email out about this hopefully later today, on the weekend for sure. Just a reminder that on Monday, we won't have class in person, right? I'm going to record, like pre-record something for you, and you can watch it kind of at your own pace. I have it's a teaching demonstration to do at 11, but it's across campus, and I'm just like, I can't. It's important. I can't be like running from here to the turtle, the Tory lecture. It's just not going to work. So Monday's recording will be, or Monday's class will be a recording, and I'll post it, and I'll send the link out. I'll put it in the announcement thread and all of that jazz, and we'll be talking about Twenge. It'll pick up from wherever we left off today and kind of go from there. So yeah, Monday again, no in-person class, but I won't leave you with one less class. We're still, because I think have a little bit of time to cover Twenge, and then maybe one lecture on Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, which is less than I wanted to do, but we're just gonna make lemonade, and then next Friday will be review, right? So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. Okay, I think we have like one slide left in this presentation, so we're just gonna finish talking a little bit about mental health in general. Then I want to shift into kind of talking about Jean Twenge's 2017 book, iGen, and what it says specifically about Gen Z, who they are, and all that jazz. So I guess, we were talking, kind of last time, just about some of the general mental health trends. They're pretty consistent in English-speaking countries, and, I could show you the charts on Scandinavia as well, right? Scandinavia looks very similar. So advanced democracies, kind of all we're seeing in our youngest generation, right, in Gen Z, some pretty negative mental health outcomes, right? And we ended off, with the political patterns, right? In terms of self-derogation or belief that you kind of stink, right, and you don't matter. There's a political divide. Liberals, progressives, people tend to feel, higher levels of self-derogation. But if we look at external locus of control, and like I said last time, an external locus of control is bad, specifically because it means you don't feel like you're in control of your own life. And if you don't feel like you're in control of your own life, you don't think you can change anything, right? So at the end of the day, external locuses are really problematic for people, because if you don't feel like you can change your life and things aren't going well, you feel like you're kind of stuck. And we see that most, in liberal girls and amongst conservative boys, right, who have higher levels or they express more of an external locus of control than conservative girls and liberal boys, both of whom feel, less of that. Okay, so social media, right? There's some debate, when I look at the Springtide data and the Springtide data on loneliness in particular, Springtide doesn't seem to think that loneliness is controlled by social media, right? That basically, whether you use social media a lot or very little, similar rates of loneliness tend to prevail the entire generation. And this is probably what we call a collective action problem, right? When whatever's contributing to loneliness in Gen Z, and I think there's good reasons to think that phones and social media probably are playing a role in this. Because so much of the generation is using it, even if you don't spend a lot of time on social media, right? You're still feeling those collective effects. Now, this is data from Jonathan Haidt, again, from his Substack, right? Basically, Haidt and Twenge created the graph from data from this study. Kelly, Zeland, Walla, Booker, and Sacker And basically what we see is, so clinically relevant depressive symptoms, right? The percent of UK teens depressed as a function of hours of social media. And we do see, right, at no social media, we still have, a good amount of depression amongst both boys and girls. But the more social media you use, 5+ hours per day or per weekday, for girls, especially, there's a pretty statistically significant effect, right? Going from like, let's say 12% here to, what we're talking about, 36, 37% up here. So if you spend 5 hours or more a day on social media, much more likely that you're going to feel these effects. And the same for boys, though the effect isn't as strong, right? They get just below 15% with more social media time. And it takes, it takes more social media to create less of an effect in boys. So social media, I think, definitely playing a role according to these numbers, but it's probably not an isolated thing either. Okay. Yay, that's it for that one. I'll now discard my doodles. Okay. I have Gene Twenge open. Is this the one? Yes. All right. Okay, launch. I didn't check if anybody had questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. New and not quite the final Slido, but we're getting close. So, Shelby, you sat with your friends today. You weren't a loner. What happened? Nice jersey, by the way. It gives you power, right? The power to fight loneliness. That's right. Interestingly, because life is a strange thing. I was working on my teaching demonstration yesterday, and it's all about loneliness and Gen Z. It's weird. Go with what you know, right? And as I opened up, my Google News feed, there was a whole story on Google News just about the fact that there's this big initiative to fight loneliness at U of A amongst students. I think it's called Just Say Hi. So they're going to stick like stickers on tables in cab and sub, where you scan a QR code and it gives you information about how to meet people, which I'm like, great, more phones. That'll solve everything. It'll be amazing. Okay, well, let's talk about Gene Twenge, who we've talked about a lot already. I'm sorry. I know we talked a lot about her when we talked about generations at the beginning of the course, but we'll talk about her again a little bit, because I think this book, iGen, specifically about Gen Z, and one thing I'll say about Jean, she knows how to write a great title and a really long subtitle for the book. Right? So iGen, awesome title, right? Why today's super connected kids are growing up less rebellious, more tolerant, less happy, and completely unprepared for adulthood. And what that means for the rest of us, right? So Jean, like I said, great job on the title. The subtitle is a bit long, takes up half the cover of the book. But let's not let that get in our way. All right, so who is she? I'll just remind you. So Jean, she's a professor of psychology, and technically she's a social psychologist. So I don't have to completely make fun of her, right? Because there's the sociology aspect there. At San Diego State University, and she's emerged since 2017, I would say, as one of the most provocative, interesting, and authoritative voices on the crisis that is facing, our youngest generation. Well, I guess we now have the alphas, but the generation that is now between basically 29 and 11 years old in Gen Z. And this is the culmination of a lot of work she's done, right? She started writing about the millennials, right? So her PhD work was actually on Gen X, which is her own generation. And then she wrote some somewhat unflattering books about the millennial generation, the narcissism epidemic, and Generation Me. And then iGen in 2017. And then in 2023, the book we talked about at the beginning of the course, Generations, where, we took a lot of the data from the start of the course. But basically, her themes, generational differences, which we talked about, and especially in these books, Generation Me and iGen, long-term declines in happiness amongst young people. Okay. So even though she abandoned it in Generations, right, she tried to coin this term for your generation, right, for Gen Z, iGen. Like you have an iPhone and an iPad, you were iGen, specifically because what she thinks kind of marks Gen Z off as different is the internet, right? The internet and its pervasiveness from basically, the oldest of iGen would be born in 1995, making them 29 years old. The internet sort of becomes a feature of everyday life in the late 90s, right? Mid to late 90s. So basically, iGen can't remember a time without the internet. And as time has gone forward, it's permeated more and more parts of their lives, right? It's gone from something where, it was a computer in your house and at school that had the internet to it's the rectangle in your pocket that you carry around all the time that you're now essentially, and people used to talk about sort of, online time and IRL in real life. But increasingly this distinction doesn't even make sense because the two things have merged into sort of a hybrid life, right? Your online and in real life times can't be neatly separated. I mean, quite frankly, because you're online while you're in real life, right? And Sherry Turkle, when she talks about teenagers in one of her books, she talks about being alone together, right? So people are on their phones. The title of the book, it's a really good book too. I wish I could talk about every good book on this subject. And maybe one day I will. In a dream world where I get the job I'm applying for, and I get to teach these 400 level seminars. I could teach about youth and technology, and we could go through all of Turkle's books and Jonathan's and Gene Twenge's, and it would be a magical world. I mean, for me to get people to read books. I don't know about for you. Maybe you'd be like, books. That's so 2005. Okay. So, right. Basically, she says, and I think what we see is, 2012 for her is a real kind of tipping point where basically half of Americans own a smartphone, higher percentages of teenagers and emerging adults, right? And it becomes a ubiquitous feature. Okay, so yeah, that said, I do tend to be a little bit doom and gloom about smartphones because, coming from a media studies tradition that was heavy on Harold Innis, Marshall McLuhan, and Neil Postman, I tend to, see the bad side of a lot of technological questions. But there are some good things, right? When we talk about things like the digital divide, right? There used to be this thing in the early days of the internet where the internet was sort of for rich people, right? Because home internet was really expensive. You needed to own a computer to get on the internet. It was really quite difficult to do. Smartphones have really democratized the internet in major ways, right? Especially cheap, and typically Android-based smartphones have made it possible for just about anybody, right? Like you can buy them at 7-Eleven, right? You can go to 7-Eleven, you can get a cheap Android cell phone and a SIM card that has some basic access to the internet. You can, pop around to different Starbucks and McDonald's and Tim Hortons locations and have some semblance of an online life, even if, you're not particularly wealthy. So in terms of a digital divide, digital haves and digital have-nots, we see, virtually, within, say, like socioeconomic classes, we've seen a disappearance of basic access to the internet. Everybody has access, right? Everybody has some kind of online presence. And when we look at it, I don't know if I have it on, it's not for a few slides, but, if we look at, say, poor groups in the US, some racialized groups like African Americans and Latinos that tend to be poorer than whites, in terms of online time, they're spending as much time on social media as their richer peers. So we don't have a huge digital divide in terms of basic access. There is still a bit, so low SES youth spent almost as much time online as their higher SES peers. There's still a gap in terms of technology and access to personal computers, right? Personal computers remain horrifyingly expensive. You can get a Chromebook or a cheap Windows machine in the $500 range, but for really high quality ones, right, you're talking, $1,500 on average. And increasingly, one of the other things that's creating a greater digital divide is subscriptions. Right, my Office 365 subscription, at $99 a year, puts it out of range for a lot of people. So again, like if you think of what we talked about when we talked about work, right? The number one skill that employers are always looking for on Indeed and all those sites is proficiency with Microsoft Office. There's still a gap in some of this because higher SES youth are going to have more access to these technologies at home. They're more pervasive, so they get more used to using them. Okay. All right. So, and we talked about a lot of this earlier in the course, so I will not dwell on it too much. But iGen, right? There's a couple of things happening, right? Greater individualism starts with the boomers, as we talked about at the beginning of the course, and it's been growing and growing generation by generation. Gene calls millennials the narcissist generation, or generation me, because it's all about them. iGen, we see even more focus on individuals and individual identities, right? And obviously at the beginning of the course, we talked about how that manifests in things like gender, right? Thinking about gender and real focus on the inner life in that way, in ways that doesn't make sense to older generations. They're also obsessed with safety, right? And even safety in terms of, their thought worlds, right? Words that make them feel unsafe, or speech, right? Speech can make them feel unsafe. And so, they're really focused on safety, physical and kind of mental safety. They're fearful of their economic future. I mean, I think some of that has abated a little bit since Gene wrote the book, but in 2017, right, they were worried about their futures. And certainly things like, concerns around things like housing are huge for iGen. And I still need to fix this typo. iGen has no patience for inequality based on gender, race, or sexual orientation. Right. So basically, they are super inclusive and all of that fun stuff. And, and again, we talked about this earlier in the course. We're having a really long childhood for iGen and a really long adolescence, right? Adolescence. I'll just write ado. Really long childhood and really long adolescence, right? They're taking a really, really, really long time to launch fully into adulthood. And we see this, right, in driver's licenses, jobs, and we talked about this all at the beginning of the course. Dating, they have less sex, they hang out with their parents a lot more, right? They're more comfortable going out with their parents for longer. They show less of the markers of independence and adulthood at earlier ages, especially compared to Gen X and the millennials, right? For whom, and if you listen to our, illustrious Deputy Prime Minister, the Honorable Chrystia Freeland, right, she will tell you that, well, today she bicycles and, uses public transit, except when she has a private car drive from Toronto to Montreal to meet her while she flies. But, in those other cases, she takes transit and bikes. But when she turned 16 as a youth in Alberta, right, she went and got her driver's license. That was the normal experience for her. She's Gen X. It's increasingly less common for Gen Z, right? Average ages that they're getting their licenses are now creeping into their 20s. So, okay, yeah, and I think we've established, hopefully, in our last unit, they're on the edge, and I think not even on the edge anymore. I think they've jumped into the pool of a deep mental health crisis, despite being physically safer, right? Less likely to smoke. They're smoking less. They're doing fewer drugs. I know it seems shocking when I say this. People are like, people use tons of drugs still. Yes, but much less than millennials did, and much less than Gen X did. Drink less and later, less likely to drive hazardously, super safe drivers. I mean, they're less likely to get in a car driven by, someone who's intoxicated. Why? Well, they're at home watching Netflix, for one thing, right? You can't get into a car at a party driven by someone who's intoxicated if you were never at the party because you were playing Fortnite, right? And which nothing wrong with playing Fortnite, but you can't. The same thing with this. You're less likely to get murdered, less likely to get into a fight, because your PlayStation can't kill you, right? And it can't beat you up. If you're not anywhere where people are, and this is the big problem for Gen Z in a lot of ways, right? Why we talk about loneliness, they're less likely to be out with people, and you can't get murdered or get into a fight if you're in your house. Or you can, but it's harder. And yeah, I mean, when they're in their teens, right, parents know where they are 75% of the time. And one thing that Twenge talks about in the book, which I always think is really interesting, is, she compares it to the millennials who, when they were in college, and because the US has such a, travel away from home kind of culture of going to college, right? You leave your home and move away to college, but they are still in contact with their parents a lot of the time. So even into adulthood, right, those first kind of college years, they're in touch with their parents a lot, right? Parents know where they are 75% of the time, and with whom 65% of the time. This is obviously made possible by technology, right? Cell phones, tracking, just being able to text someone is much easier. When I was, in high school, we didn't have cell phones. I mean, we did, but nobody really owned them because they were super expensive. And so my parents probably wouldn't have known where I was because it just wasn't an easy way to do it, right? I had to find a home phone or a landline or a payphone. Yes, they existed back in the past. It cost a quarter, and it was a shock when they went up to 35 cents. They used to have them everywhere. But one of the things you've lost with the end of the payphone is you can no longer say, here's a quarter, call someone who cares, because that no longer makes sense. But it was a great country song in the day. And a great kind of dismissive line. Okay, so they get less independence, right? And they're less likely to, do things like, especially like the childcare industry. We talked about Gen X, right? And to some extent the boomers and the millennials, where it's really common to let your kids just go home after school and wait there and watch TV and have sex with their girlfriend or boyfriend, until you got home. Increasingly, right, more time is monitored. It's in after school programs and all of this fun stuff. Okay. I was showing my wife my job or my teaching demonstration. And I'm like, and there's like about 20 slides. And she's like, there's no way you're going to get through 20 slides in 30 minutes. I'm like, absolutely can do that. Trust me, I've done it before. Okay, it'll be fun. Okay, what am I talking about on this slide? Okay, mental health concerns, right? And here's where, I think this intersects with this this Springtide Institute research on loneliness, right? So yeah, because Gen Z is on screens all the time, right? They spend less time with each other. And I think really importantly, something that Jean sort of missed in the book, but I think it's clear from the other research we've looked at in the course and stuff that, I found in Jonathan's book, Jonathan Haidt's book as well. They spend less time with each other, but also considerably less time with adults, right? With especially adults that could mentor them, right? So again, this contributes to their physical safety. They're at home, on their phones, communicating with each other, right? It's Netflix and chill. By the way, I don't know if it's a generational thing. My kids tell me to chill all the time. It's one of the most irritating words in the English language now. It's like, chill, Dad. I'm like, okay, I would, but you're about to light something on fire. So I feel like maybe chill is not the right word, right? It used to be Netflix and chill increasingly for Gen Z. It's just Netflix. I know I make that joke like 75 times in the course, but I think it's important. Okay, it's not just that, right? They spend less time, and this was as of 2017, volunteering, working, right? We saw that Gen Z is far less likely to be working than millennials or Gen X were. They spend less time doing homework. They spend less time playing sports, and they spend far less time, and as I think we saw, attending religious services. They're less religious. Much of that is now spent on phones, right? It's on screens, phones, video games. They have more free time than millennials did, about an hour and a half more at the same time in their life. But, they're spending much of that online, right? And with in a sense, with other people, right? We can think of Alone Together, right? It's a catchy, I will say, Sherry Turkle's great at writing titles as well, and it's pithy and it's interesting. it's alone together, right? If you look at what my son does, right? He comes home, he wants to play Fortnite, doesn't get to do it every day, but when he does, he's on with his friends, right? He's alone in our house, but he's together with other people in some sense, right? But not in an embodied kind of way. And okay, what matters here, and I think all the charts we saw, in the last couple lectures suggest, that 2012 is a sort of tipping point where rates of depression, suicidality, increases in anxiety, have all really started to crunch on Gen Z in a way that's not easy to explain outside of a major shift. Okay, adulting. Uh, so, yeah, I mean, amongst Gen Z, being an adult, and I think this is true amongst younger millennials as well, being an adult has started to take on something of a negative connotation, right? Which has spurred, the creation of special vocabulary, adulting, right? To do grown-up things and hold responsibilities such as a 9 to 5 job, a mortgage, a car payment, or anything else that makes one think of grown-ups. Okay, so, right, all the things that people used to do, if we talk about the boomers, right, we talked about the boomers lots. You used to do this at 18, 19, maybe 20, 21, right? You were out of school, you got yourself a job at the old Ford factory, you started building, I don't know, Mustangs, I guess, and F-150s, and you, why is interesting. Oh, I know what that is. Never mind. Sorry, my phone is ringing and it's in my ear. It's my daughter's school. She's sick today, and I forgot to call them to tell them she's not there because I'm a terrible person. I'll do it later. Okay. What am I saying? Class dismissed. No, we cannot dismiss you yet. I must get as much done here as possible if we have to have any hope of the long promised one lecture of Jonathan Haidt's book. Okay. So, yeah, iGeners, according to Twenge and in her kind of interviews, more likely to say they wish they could return to childhood. And this actually, this is something that she says, I don't fully agree. They don't tend to be resented being treated like children. They want to stay children longer. I've never noticed that in y'all, right? In students that I've had. I think, most of my students don't fit that pattern, but maybe San Diego is a little different. I mean, it's in California, so who knows? Um, but yeah, I think more likely to be in close communication with parents even once they leave home, right? Because it's possible, right? It's easy and possible to stay in touch with your parents and for your parents to text you 22 times a day. And she tells anecdotes of, meeting with students. And again, these are students who've commuted away to school and they're getting texts from their parents while they're in meetings with, with their professor. So we do see that. Okay. And this one is, I think, sorry. I thought of a joke having to do with this. And I was going to use it in my teaching demonstration, but I don't think it's going to fit because I changed the focus a little bit. So if you think of what is the thing that I love the most, the last thing I see at night, the first thing I see in the morning, and the thing I replace every 2 to 3 years, and no, it's not my wife, right? It's your smartphone, right? Mostly all iGeners now sleep with their phones at their bedside or under their pillow. And I know, it's like, what's the excuse? Like, well, it's the thing that wakes me up in the morning. So back, in yesteryear, many moons ago, they invented something called an alarm clock. And the great thing is now you can buy one for about $6 at Walmart. So that's just a silly excuse, right? But we all have, to some extent, these devices that are with us all the time, right? And it is, in a lot of cases, the last thing you see at night, the first thing you see in the morning, right? Before you even go to the bathroom, some people are checking their phones, right? To make, I don't know why. Maybe I'm just not that interesting. No one cares enough to get a hold of me. I guess everyone who's significant in my life lives in my house. I guess that's how it goes. But yeah, it's sort of pervasive, right? And this, in a lot of ways, right? You want to see how pervasive it is. This was kind of 2016 numbers. These numbers will have gone up. So iGen high schoolers were spending 2.25 hours texting, 2 hours a day on the internet, 1.5 hours a day on electronic gaming, half hour on video chat for a total of 6 hours, 6.25 hours per day. You can bump that up to 7.75 hours if you add watching TV. And a lot of this is happening all at the same time, right? This is like, oh, this is the bugaboo with my kids. It's like, okay, you're playing video games and watching a YouTube video. You know, my son's playing the PlayStation and he's got a tablet open and watching like YouTube shorts. I'm like, just do one thing, please. And he's like, no. Okay, boomer. And I'm not a boomer, but okay. Sometimes I feel like it. Okay. How are we doing? I have to prove to my wife by showing her this video that I can get through 20 slides in a half hour. Okay, so these are numbers that end in 2015, and as I said, these numbers are going to be about a decade old, and we've seen some more up-to-date numbers through the course. But in 2015, when she wrote the book, right, 87% of 12th grade girls were using social media every day. 3/4 of 12th grade boys. Race and class differences basically disappear, right? What we see is that race and class differences, so African American, Latino, Asian, white, are all using these technologies at about the same rate. And I think this is one of the most interesting numbers. Only 2% of 12th grade girls never use social media. Okay, so what does that mean? So it means 98% of 12th grade girls do. Now, I think I would not be going, out on too much of a limb to say that the only kind of behaviors that could possibly exceed 90. So, I mean, that's pervasive, right? That's everyone, essentially, with the exception of a few like loners and weirdos and for whatever reason, maybe people who are extremely poor, right? Who can't afford the technologies to do this. But 98% is basically everyone. Maybe the margin of error on that is 1 or 2%. Which means the only things that kind of compare to this, in terms of scale, are things like, right, 98% of 12th grade girls are also breathing and eating. Okay, it's a joke, right? It's super pervasive, right? It's so pervasive that everyone is doing it. And I think that's an important thing. And this is where, it becomes a collective action problem, right? Anything that you're wanting to propose, right? And, Jonathan has a few major proposals in his book, and I'll talk about them probably on Monday or Wednesday. Anything that you want to propose is going to hit a huge collective action problem because, are you going to be, the parents who try to drag this number down and means that your kid doesn't have a phone or social media, right? Or is spending less time and is in then some way isolated. Because that number is so high, you run into this problem that's really, really hard to change because suddenly, a shift has to happen a lot of people at the same time. Okay. Boo-boo. Okay, this is a major one. Okay, image cultivation. And here, 2010 is a big year, right? So 2010 is a really significant year for the problem of image cultivation. And this is a huge problem for girls. It's less of a problem for boys, but it's a huge problem for girls. Now, what happens in 2010? Okay, a couple of things. The iPhone 4, the Galaxy S, launch. Now, they launch within a month of each other. So what makes these devices particularly problematic, potentially? Both of these are, so the iPhone and the Galaxy S both feature a front-facing camera, right? A selfie camera. And then the same year, a little bit later in 2010, you get the launch of, what do we call it? A little app, you might have heard of it. Instagram. Now, Instagram is sort of a bit player for a couple of years. It starts to gain popularity. By 2012, it has 9 million users, about 9 to 10 million users. And then in 2012, it gets bought by Facebook. Right? So in 2012, it had this many. By 2014, Instagram has 90 million users, right? So the purchase of Instagram by Facebook really quickly transforms it into a major social media platform, right? It links into your Facebook account. And it goes, it becomes 10 times bigger. And it's continued to grow since then. Obviously, it's one of the monsters of social media. Arguably, right, its parent company's app, Facebook, is much less important to Facebook today than Instagram is. Okay, so why is this a problem? Okay, so, and there's been some work to kind of reduce this by Facebook. So it's really image focused, right? So a lot of what ends up happening is that girls in particular start taking a ton of selfies of themselves, posting them online for the judgment of their peers and the entire world. And right until a few years ago, it had a like button where everybody could see how many likes a picture got. So it starts to become a measure of popularity, right? So I can forget about Snapchat. Who cares about that platform, right? It's just for sending nudes and nothing else, which is why when my daughter was like, I'd really like to get Snapchat, I'm like, absolutely not. Not happening. Like, I'll give you Instagram before, and you're never getting that. Um, I'm stern but benevolent. Right. So basically what ends up happening with Instagram, girls are constantly in search of likes. They start to feel pressure to be on the platform. It becomes all consuming, and a lot of their self-worth becomes tied up in image cultivation and how people are reacting to the things they're posting online. And they'd like to feel, a lot of them say they'd like to stop. And you get technologies that come out, apps to help your pictures look better. What is it called? Facetune? And a lot of other apps like that, right, that are meant to basically edit your pictures for you. Filters become a big deal, all that stuff. Okay. Though he looks very engaged, doesn't he? Okay, one more thing to say about Instagram. It becomes a major part of girls' social lives, right? There's a whole kind of system that they create very organically of how I'm going to trip on this cable. Of how you rate each other's popularity, right? And if you're mad at someone, you untag them from your photos. You don't tag them in a photo that they're clearly in. All of these things start to happen, right? And there was one article in the Atlantic, the secret language of Instagram for girls, right? That basically outlined all of the ways that Instagram started to be used by girls to kind of for social control and popularity purposes. Okay, so girls spend way more time on social media than boys do. That's pretty clear. Oh, maybe one more thing. I'll tell you one more thing about this book. This is a really interesting book. And I'll tell you one more thing. One other thing that starts to happen, which is really devastating for girls' self-image, and it relates to boys, which is what I thought about on the next slide. Boys, what do? They start to collect nudes of girls they know. And it becomes a major, point of kind of pride and social status to be able to get nude pictures of your classmates and other girls and then to share them with your peers. So there are, semi-nude or nude pictures of girls being circulated amongst boys, which creates a whole bunch of problems because you start to get, what do we call that? Revenge porn, right? Becomes a major problem for teenage girls. And when we start to see, girls headed to the emergency room for self-harm incidents, a lot of times is because, one of these, because some boy was pissed off at you, sent that out to all of your classmates, embarrassing you. So this becomes a major, major problem as well. And, one of the things that Nancy Jo Sales, who wrote that book, suggests this is not like, when the people she was talking to, a lot of them were nice middle-class boys. It just happened. This had become part of the culture of collecting, semi-nude or nude pictures of girls. Okay, 7 minutes. All right, so girls spend more time on social media, boys spend more time on video games, right? And the video games changed, right? It was, Call of Duty and Fortnite and Minecraft. So, this seems to be somewhat, Yeah, so teens on average spend 1.5 hours playing video games today compared to 1 hour in 2008. Girls are playing more games than they used to, but they're different kinds of games on the whole, right? It's much more phone-based games. Boys are tending to be playing AAA immersive type video games on consoles or PC, right? Things like Fortnite, Rocket League, Call of Duty, whatever happens to be the popular thing at the time. I don't even know anymore, and I can't keep track. All I know is Minecraft makes no sense. That's all I know. I don't understand why it's popular. My son hates it when I call it "Go play computer Lego." He doesn't like it when I call it that, but it's fun. 9% of teens, report playing 40 or more hours a day. Okay, just to put that in perspective, right? So 9%, almost 1 out of 10 teens have what amounts to a full-time job playing video games, right? That's kind of crazy. Okay, so do I have this on the next slide? No, but I'll just tell you, there's some dispute in terms of what this does. Leonard Sachs in particular, so like Jonathan Haidt thinks it's pretty harmful, again, because it's a disembodied experience. You're spending time with friends often, right? Like I said, my son plays Fortnite with a bunch of his friends. So far, he still lets me tag along, which is fun. My avatar is a duck. In Fortnite, I am Sergeant Drake. I am a 6-foot-tall duck, and it's awesome. And my son thinks it's the stupidest thing ever, which makes it even better. So far, he lets me tag along, and with his friends. So I'm like hanging out with a bunch of 11-year-olds playing Fortnite, which who knows? I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. Sounds weird when you say it out loud. I'll put it that way. So Jonathan Haidt thinks is ultimately really negative because it's taking time away that they could be doing embodied things and especially building links in the real world, right? And being physically active. Leonard Sachs has tended to think that video games are a little bit less of a problem, especially for boys, specifically because he makes a kind of distinction between video games and social media. So in video games, one of the things that he'll suggest, and one of the reasons, that he suggests that video games for boys to some extent are actually potentially good or at least less harmful is because, okay, what happens, right? What happens when you play video games for, 5, 10, 20 hours? You get really good at them, right? Well, okay, maybe 100,000 hours. I don't know. You start to get really good at them, right? And you start to get a kind of high, especially something like Fortnite or Rocket League, right, where there's ranks and tiers, right? You start to move up the tiering system and you get better and better and you see your progress, which makes you feel a sense of accomplishment, right? And that's good for self-esteem, right? You feel like you're good at something. Social media, on the other hand, in a lot of cases, especially for girls, is A, very performative, and B, will tend to make them feel kind of bad about themselves, especially if they get negative comments about appearance, whatever it happens to be. And there's obviously a lot of that on social media platforms of all kinds. So like Leonard Sachs thinks, video games probably not the best thing for boys, but far less harmful than social media because at least they start to feel a sense of accomplishment, right? As they get good at the game, they start to feel kind of, the self-esteem that comes from, getting good at something. Now, would it be better to get good at, I don't know, building birdhouses or building things, fixing things, playing sports? Probably, but it still has at least a positive aspect. As long as it doesn't become all-consuming, right? When it becomes all-consuming, and you get here, then you've obviously got problems. Okay. I call this postman's nightmare. Because, postmen love books. So, all right, reading, trust me. Reading is something that's really difficult. I've just been reading a bunch of pedagogical research, right? A bunch of research on teaching. And one of the big challenges now is getting undergrads to read things, right? Because it's become, less culturally normal and there's so many distractions. So a lot of young people now only report reading what they're assigned for school. In the late 1970s, a majority of teens read books or magazines daily. Again, this is the media environment, right? Today, there are a lot more sources of distraction than there were in the 1970s, right? Then there was TV with 3 channels or 4 channels maybe. Today there is, Netflix, there's video games, there's your phone, there's everything, right? So a lot more competition. By 2015, only 16% of teens said, they read a book or magazine daily. Yeah, newspapers have declined, right? We're looking at the death of traditional media because nobody consumes it anymore. All news is consumed online. There's bad things about that too, but that's a story for a different course. Reading and writing skills on the SATs, right? So that test that's administered for college entry are down considerably from even the millennials, right? Millennials scored much higher, and iGeners are less proficient readers. They're less proficient writers, and this is something that all my colleagues complain about, y'all, is like your essays stink. You're not as good of writers as students were 10 years ago. I haven't taught an essay-based class in a while, so I don't even know. But this is a common complaint for educators. And yeah, deep attention, right? Basically, paying attention to things for a really long time is a struggle. The average iGener in studies switches tasks every 19 seconds, right? Because ping, you got a text message. Ping, your farm is ready to be plowed on that video game you're playing. Ping, hi, it's the creepy owl from Duolingo. You haven't been in and done your homework for 5 days. Come back, please. Right? The phone itself forces you to shift tasks a lot. Or you get a call from your kid's school during a lecture. All of those things. Okay, we're out of time. I'm over time. I've done it again. All right, again, Monday, no class. I'm going to record stuff for you. So you'll have to watch my doodling on slides remotely. Wednesday, we should be back in person. If we're not, whatever, I will let you know. And then we basically have 2 lectures and then review and we're done. So we're careening towards the end at breakneck speed. All right.